everybody. I would like to start my presentation by thanking the organizers for this wonderful event and the possibility to share our work. I sincerely apologize for not being present in Ljubljana these days. I would have loved to meet you all in person. Alas, Tomaž and I have seen through some unforeseen changes in our lives, and it was impossible for either of us to be here at the moment. So please accept my apologies. Now I will dip into my presentation. The title is Education for a More Than Human World, Current Issues in Critical Animal Pedagogy. I will start by warming us up, giving a little introduction to critical animal studies. But as you are all aware, critical animal studies are closely connected to the animal liberation movement. They're linked to activism and the goal of social change, similar to gender studies, African and Black studies, etc. They are fundamentally emancipatory in character, addressing anthropocentrism and speciesism, and the complex interrelationships of power systems such as racism, sexism, classism, ableism, ageism, and speciesism, of course. Critical animal studies are located in the tradition of critical theory. Here are some examples. Barbara Noske, for example, draws on Marxism, Adams and Donovan on ecofeminism, Armstrong on post-colonial theory, Shukin and Loro Bida on Foucault. And there have been quite a number of studies investigating the legacies of the Frankfurt School and how that is meaningful for critical animal studies as well. Because Horkheimer and Adorno did an analysis of the history of Western civilization, and they pointed to the dominance of instrumental reason and the instrumentalization of nature and non-human animals. And they have offered an analysis of the authoritarian character that shows the connection between the dehumanization of the other and his or her animalization. Following the aims of critical animal studies, critical animal educators often refer to Paulo Freire's pedagogy of the oppressed for its emancipatory potential. Freire's motto was, "Education is never neutral. It can oppress or liberate." In this paper, we would like to point to some useful, some problematic, and finally to some inspiring concepts in Freire's work. Let me begin with a very basic thought of Freire's. He critiqued the mainstream banking model, which we all know from our education systems, where teachers deposit knowledge in students like money in a bank account. Students reproduce that knowledge. The better this transmission works, the better the teacher and the students. Students do not learn to express themselves, nor to be critical of society and of power structures. Freire's critique of the dehumanizing because functionalizing pedagogy corresponds to the critical animal pedagogy critique of an educational system that objectifies, imprisons, controls, manipulates, and silences non-human animals in order to reproduce their use. Freire's counter-proposition was a pedagogy of dialogue, where teachers and students learn at the same time. They are both learning subjects in that they produce and share knowledge. The culture of silence is transcended and society is transformed. Takes a Freirean approach in its attempt to demystify the power relationship between humans and animals, promote consciousness raising, political activism, and the development of a counterculture. However, beyond a promise of a liberation pedagogy for CAP, Freire's anthropocentric anthropology has been pointed out as problematic. We take up this critique and furthermore discuss the application of Freire's education for oppressors and his concept of liberation to non-human beings. Liberation for Freire means understanding one's oppressed situation, conscientization, politicization, and emancipation. It implies moving from an animal-like life to a true human life, what Freire calls humanization. Liberation, then, is understood in anthropocentric terms as the ability to articulate and defend a notion of common political good. Animals are thus never able to attain this state. But this is not a lack. It simply means that we are trying to liberate animals from an anthropocentric perspective. For example, animals not having human language is not a hindrance, because if humans do not have wings, this is also not a lack. And the meaning in this is that we cannot simply apply Freire to critical animal pedagogy and equate repressed humans with repressed animals. What does the phrase animal liberation then actually mean? Liberation in critical animal pedagogy is considered in three ways. On the one hand, liberation through abolitionism ultimately means the extinction of domesticated animals, and we can discuss whether we think this is desirable or ethical. We could also mean liberation as liberation from abusive conditions. That is well-meaning, but it's a paternalistic act, which does not imply an emancipation of an animal subject. And thirdly, liberation, as some authors suggest, can happen through human learning with and from a non-human other. We propose, however, that these attempts often fail as we refuse to interrogate the effects of power structures, human projections, and the behavioristic paradigm on animal subjects as owners of their own questions and experiences, that is, learners. So it seems that we need a new concept of liberation. So one solution might be that, as many researchers in the areas have already done, turn to educating the human elites. Maybe an analogy between Freire's oppressors and animal oppressors, that is humans, is more in place. For Freire, both the oppressed as well as the oppressors are in need of liberation from violence and inhumane acts. Like in Hegel, where no one, neither slave nor master, is free. Both are held captives by their mutual relationship. Then the main goal of CAP is not liberating animals, but educating and liberating the human elites. However, educating the elites, humans, is challenging. Often the motivation to change their lifestyle is lacking, as most of us know. Also, willful ignorance, denialism, and cognitive dissonance act powerfully because of different ideologies, including carnism, to prevent social change. All this has to be taken into account while considering viable CAP methods. Finally, we would like to inspire CAP with Freire's critique of the behavioristic learning model and apply it to non-human learners, as the view of animals as learners for liberation remains underdeveloped in CAP. We especially challenge the belief that learning for animals means training, and we follow Freire's critique of the banking model and all forms of conditioning and functionalization based on the behavioristic model. According to self-determination theory, there are different types of external motivation on a continuum from heteronomous to autonomous, meaning that as we identify with and integrate social norms and expectations, we increasingly experience external motivation as internal. Set apart from this continuum are the experience of amotivation as a result of a lack of perceived competence or perceived behavior outcome independence, that is learned helplessness. And on the other hand, the experience of intrinsic motivation, where behavior is associated with an inherent satisfaction, rather than serving a goal or value. While it is relatively easy to recognize external heteronomous motivation and deal with it, internalized forms of external motivation are much more perfidious in that they are much harder to interrogate critically. However, the negative consequences of behavioristic training, such as decreased intrinsic motivation, ownership, curiosity, creativity, risk-taking, cooperation, and responsibility-taking, have been shown in numerous studies. Indeed, too much conditioned reactive behavior is associated with inner conflicts, anxiety, drivenness, depletion, and alienation on the individual psychological level. Against the dominant concern with controlling and manipulating the behavior of human and non-human learners, it would be appropriate for CAP to foreground how organisms naturally learn, develop, and self-organize actions with the aim of preserving integrity and well-being. All organisms need and desire to understand their world through gaining information and processing experience, to enhance their complexity while preserving their overall integrity and autonomy. Intrinsic motivation to make experiences, explore, and play has been likened to the emergence of the first faint thrills of intellectual joy in the emotional life of the animal. It is based on the existence of primordial centers of individuality that convey an inner organization and a phenomenal sense of self and autonomy. Today's discussions of being interested in non-human animals increasingly include their agency, interests, and needs. However, we still lack the willingness and ability to preserve an appropriate social context and dynamic, which facilitates their autonomy and ownership as emancipated learners. we propose that a sustained effort in CAP is undertaken in order to develop this area further, conceptually and practically. So our conclusion is that there is a big temptation to either write Freire off because of his anthropocentrism, or to equate the animals with the oppressed people. But as we have demonstrated, the relationship between Freire and CAP is multifaceted and mutually enriching, worth pursuing in more depth. Thank you.